Hello everyone and welcome to my presentation about my final year project Progress 1. My project title is Privilege Escalation Focused Offensive Security Training Platform, and this is the presentation that describes what I have done so far in Progress 1. So I will quickly move to the outline of this presentation. I will first provide a brief description recap about the project and the development methodology that I used, and also the system architecture that I have designed. And then I will talk about the scope of the first increment or the first progress, and then I will present a simple demo to show off the progress that I have done so far. So first, the project is basically uh, is a platform to provide privilege escalation training. So its goal is to skip the initial access training because there are just so many uh, solutions or platforms for that, and it will provide simulated environments using Docker, and it's also going to focus on real life scenarios. And one of the goals is also to be a packaged and portable solution, a portable platform that can be extended. So the development methodology that I use is a iterative and incremental development. And in this methodology, basically those are the steps that I have to go through, and those those four steps are actually iterative steps. So for every increment, those four steps will happen. So we'll start by the increment development, increment validation, increment integration with the system, and then the total system or the whole system validation. So since this is progress one, so that's the first increment. So as illustrated here, that's the first increment will be basically uh, the first thing done in the project development. So that system architecture basically is as shown in here in this illustration. It might be a bit overwhelming, but it is quite simple. So it is a virtual machine that is running web application and Docker instances. So the web application will be exposed to on an open port and can be accessed by the user. The user can interact with the web application and run and start and stop Docker containers um, dynamically and interactively. So that this part is the one that I focused on progress one or increment one. So this is the Docker part and the containers and so on. So the basically those are the technologies that are going to be used on in the whole project. Docker to create the environment, the Django framework to create the web application, Vagrant to create the virtual machine that will package the whole solution. So the scope of this increment is basically only Docker. So the Docker part is to configure and build the environment that uh, that will simulate the training scenarios. So the aim was actually three scenarios or three privilege escalation scenarios, and what have already been achieved is that I created six scenarios, or I managed to create six scenarios. I also started developing the framework that will enable the extendability of the project. So it will enable users to add their own scenarios later, and this is going to be an automated process basically. All right, so that's all for the um, brief introduction about this progress. I'm going now to move forward to the actual demo of what I have created so far. All right, here's my IDE or the Visual Studio Code that I use to um, write my code. And here is basically the directory structure of my. So I call this project or the platform priv-esque playground or privilege escalation playground. And then if I open here the Docker folder, and Docker folder have scenarios folder inside, then those are there into for every scenario there is a folder. This folder basically hosts two files, Docker file and setup.sh file. So the idea is that once creating while creating the scenario, basically we create the Docker file. So for example, this is a Docker file example for one of the scenarios, which is called bash grouping. And the Docker file basically pulls a Docker image and uh, to base the environment on, which in this case is Ubuntu Bionic, and then it will run a command to install the necessary packages to simulate the environment. I have some explanation for that here, and then it will add a user to the environment. It will add the low privilege user. So the privilege escalation will happen from a low privilege user to root user. Since this is only focused on Linux, I might have forgotten to mention that, but the privilege escalation training is focused on Linux only for now. So it will then copy the setup.sh, which we'll talk about later, to the inside the environment or inside the container, and then it will run that file and then we'll remove it. So basically the setup.sh file configures the vulnerability. Okay, and we'll come to that later. Then it will start an SSH server and uh, expose the port 2020 to be accessed from the host, which will be the virtual machine. And then we'll also start cron and we'll run the SSH daemon or the SSH server. So when coming to the setup.sh, it actually has the actual commands that I want to run to configure the environment to be vulnerable to a certain privilege escalation uh, vector. So in this case, it's bash grouping. So basically running some commands to configure this vulnerability, creating a file, executing the file, adding a cron job, and also running cron. Basically, that's it. Basically, uh, for every scenario, this will be different. And for every scenario, also the username and password will be different. The packages to be installed can be different, and so on. So that's basically a scenario. So what is this Docker file used for is to actually build an image of this scenario or of this environment. And once this image is built, it can be instantiated as a container or can be run as a container. And this container can be run, multiple containers can be run, and also the container can be stopped. So I'm going to take a look at that. Basically, if we see here, here's the GUI for Docker desktop on Windows. If I see the images, basically the 6 scenarios that I have, on, yeah, 6 scenarios, and those are already built images I built from those Docker files in every folder here. Okay, so since those are already built, I can simply uh, run a scenario. I can just run a scenario and expose the port 2020 22, and then this scenario is running now. I can connect to it since I know the username and password, which will be introduced to the or which will be presented to the user later in the web interface in the coming progresses. So now I can connect to it. This is Edge. Basically, shell to add localhost, and then enter the password. So I'm now inside the simulated environment. If you notice, it's a Linux environment. I can like cd home ls. It's a Linux environment. So now I can this scenario with writable password, with the writable password scenario, but the user that will be training should will not know, or in the web interface, uh, I will not present to them any information about what this change is. So they have to do their own homework and try to search for what is vulnerable in this machine. But since I know what is vulnerable, I'm just going to list the permission of the etc password file, and as can be seen here, it is writable, so it has a w, which is write permissions. Then I can basically create my own create my own uh, user and add it to the password file, and with the password that I know, and it can escalate um to root. For example, I'm gonna do it now. I'm just gonna get the first row here, and we'll just duplicate that. I will echo that, and instead of the X here, I will just add my own password. So I will just say open SSL password test, for example, and also we'll change the username to test, and I'm going to pipe that to etc password. Okay, before I run that, I'm just going to copy it and go out and cat the etc password c password. There is the last one here is shell2. There is no test, so that's what I'm going to add right now. Once I run this, okay, they have a typo here. Should be password. Okay, now if I just clear the screen and cat etc password again, I see that I have a user here with my own password. This is a hash for the password. So now I can su change to test, but I know the real password for this hash since I just created it uh, just now. So I'm just gonna get this here. Yeah. So I can change to test now and enter the password as test. Okay, there is a problem apparently. This is going to create su test. Okay, let's do this step again one more time. An SSL test. Let me figure out what's going on because yeah, it's a demo. Okay, I figured out what is going on here because I mistakenly added two times, like ran the commands two times, one without. Yeah, the first time that didn't work when I had the typo, so it added this one without any password here. So it's trying to authenticate against that. So since the etc password is writable anyways, then I can just delete uh, this line and go out again and then try again and test. Okay, now I am root. So now I successfully escalated my privilege from a regular user to root. Now if I say ID or who am I, now I am root, while just now I was the user shell2. Okay, so yeah, that's a demo for the privilege escalation part. When it comes when yeah, the same concept apply to all the scenarios, like not obviously not the same technique, but the user will go in using SSH and will log in with the credential given, and then will try to find a way to escalate their privilege by discovering the vulnerabilities that I intentionally put there. So after they discover the vulnerabilities, they will try to exploit it, and then ultimately will get root on the simulated environment. Now I can just delete uh, this scenario or this environment, this container. Okay, so the running and stopping the container, or running and deleting the containers, can also be done from the command line. Like for example, just by docker run the and the name of the scenario, and also can be done from inside from Python. There is a Python SDK or a Python API that can run and build Docker images, run Docker containers, and so on. So the idea about the automation, or creating the scenarios automatically to make this thing extendable, is to have a template. Is to have a template. The template will basically have like some placeholders, like username, password, also here username, here extra packages, uh, and yeah, extra command, and also for the setup.sh uh, content. So that's the template. Okay, now uh, I've created uh, this is the beginning of the automation process. So creating the scenario is the beginning of the automation process, because later this scenario is also need to be added to the web interface. But for now, we're just creating a scenario using Python. So I wrote this script. It's quite a long script. Uh, Basically, I've programmed this to parse a YAML file. So there will be a YAML file that describes the scenario, and this will parse it and will make a directory, or will make a folder for this scenario, and will copy the template in there, and will change the placeholders to the file to the values located at the YAML file. For example, there is this writable password .yaml. So basically, it says that it just has information: the author, the name of the scenario, what is the user credentials, the low privilege user. So for example, HL2 challenge to exclamation mark, and the vulnerability description. What is the vulnerability? What is the bash? This bash will or this bash content will end up at the setup.sh file. And if there is any extra packages, if there is any extra setup CMD, so for example, there are others that have extra packages and have longer bash. There are others that have uh, extra CMDs, and so on. So basically, uh, by parsing this YAML file, it will create a new scenario. Okay, so I'm going to present now, or demo, this creation process. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Um, by I will just remove this scenario. I will remove this, delete. I will completely delete it, and will also remove it from images here. I will remove the image that have already been built. Okay, now I don't have this scenario in my, but I have the YAML file that describes this scenario. So what I'm going to do is I just run Python and create scenario. The file is writable password.yaml. Okay, then if I run this now, it's going to copy the template inside its own directory that is named the same name, and will also uh, replace the username with this, the password with this, the bash with this, and so on. So I'm gonna run this. Okay, if you notice, the new directory has been created, and the files have been populated with the information, the username, password, the command, and so on. And now if I go to here, I find that this image already does exist here. Yeah, so this is the scenario. So for every scenario, I have a YAML file, which is different from for every scenario, and then there is an example YAML file that that users to for users to know how to create their own YAML files to create their own scenarios, basically. Okay. uh, yeah, that's it for progress one. Basically, that creating the Docker and also creating a way to automate creation of scenarios. Also worth mentioning that I'm using GitHub to track my progress or to track my coding, basically. So that's the branch that I'm working on right now, progress one Docker, and inside here there are all the same files. So after I finish coding, I just push to here. Yeah, and that's how I track my progress. Yeah, that was all for my demo in progress one. I hope it was clear and easy to follow, and please don't hesitate to reach out with any question regarding progress one. Thank you.